Somewhere inside a server Russia believed was clean, a routine fuel request from the 37th Motorized Rifle Brigade sat waiting to be processed. It was an unremarkable piece of traffic, the kind that moves through a military logistics network by the hundreds every day. A brigade running low on diesel and lubricants, requesting resupply, expecting the convoy to roll through in the usual way, over the usual route. What that request did not know, because a piece of paperwork cannot know anything, was that it was already being read by people it was never meant to reach. Ukrainian cyber intelligence had been sitting inside fragments of Russia's military communications network for weeks, patient in the way only signals intelligence can afford to be, watching ordinary traffic pass by until something in it mattered. Most of what moves through a network like that is noise, routine maintenance requests, personnel rotations, supply forms that never amount to more than paperwork. The skill in this kind of operation is not access. Access alone gets you buried in irrelevant traffic. The skill is knowing which unremarkable request, sitting quietly among hundreds of others, is actually the one worth watching. This request mattered. The 37th Brigade was not just low on fuel. It was, according to the intercepted traffic, close to critical, dependent on one single route to get resupplied at all: the Chonhar Bridge, the narrow land link connecting occupied Crimea to the southern front. Cut that bridge at the wrong moment, and the fuel never arrives no matter how many trucks Russia has waiting to send it. And unlike a convoy, whose route can be changed the moment a commander gets nervous, a bridge is fixed. It cannot be rerouted around a threat. It is the threat's target, and the target's only option, both at once. Most militaries, faced with that kind of intelligence, would have gone after the convoy itself. Trucks are easier to hit than a bridge, individually vulnerable, and hitting one feels like an immediate result, the kind of visible success that looks good in an after-action report the same day. Ukraine chose differently. A convoy destroyed is a convoy Russia can rebuild in a week, with different trucks and a different route. A bridge that fails at the exact moment a brigade depends on it is a problem Russia cannot simply route around, not on the timeline that brigade needed fuel. So the target was never the trucks, it was the only road they could use. The operation built around that decision used 2 drones, and only 2, which on its own tells you something about how confident the planning behind it was. The first was a Firepoint FP2, a mid-range strike drone Russia's air defense crews had learned to recognize by now, showing up often enough on Ukrainian raids that its radar and electronic signature sat somewhere in the back of every operator's head along that stretch of front. The second was something almost no one on the Russian side had seen fly yet: the Behemoth, a long-range strike drone unveiled only weeks earlier, carrying a dual warhead payload built for exactly this kind of target, and flying a profile designed from the outset to be forgotten by the systems meant to catch it. The difference between the 2 aircraft was not just age or reputation, it was built into how each one flew. The FP2 relied more heavily on active links back to its operators, correction data, video feed, the kind of continuous radio conversation between drone and controller that gives a jamming crew something concrete to detect and disrupt. That link is also what makes an FP2 accurate and flexible in the final approach, able to adjust to a moving or repositioned target in real time. It is a trade-off, and on most nights, against most targets, it is a trade-off worth making. The Behemoth was built around the opposite trade-off: longer range, a fixed and pre-calculated approach, and a far lighter electronic footprint, at the cost of exactly the kind of real-time flexibility the FP2 carried. For a target that was not moving, a bridge, sitting exactly where it had always sat, that flexibility was never going to matter. Its absence, though, mattered enormously, because it meant the Behemoth simply had less to detect in the first place. The FP2 crossed into detection range first, and it was meant to. Its job that night was never to strike anything. Its job was to be seen, to give Russian electronic warfare something familiar to lock onto and something predictable to jam, so that every sensor along that stretch of the line spent the next several minutes focused entirely on a drone that was never going to matter. Russian jamming found it almost immediately. The FP2's control link degraded, its track grew unstable on Russian screens, and air defense crews watching that sector did exactly what months of experience had trained them to do. They treated it as the threat, tracked it in, and brought it down well short of the bridge. On the Russian side, that felt like a win, a familiar drone caught and destroyed before it could do any damage. It was recorded as one. What no one in that chain realized was that the FP2's destruction was not a failure of the raid. It was the raid working exactly as designed, because while every sensor in range was busy finishing off a drone that was never going to reach its target, the Behemoth was already close, and almost nothing about the way it flew gave Russian defenses a reason to look for it. It held a course fixed largely to satellite navigation rather than the kind of active radio correction that gives jamming crews something to grab onto, and it kept its own emissions to almost nothing, no chatter for an electronic warfare operator to flag, no obvious pattern to separate it from background noise. It was not invisible, it was simply unremarkable. At exactly the moment every operator in range was looking somewhere else. The bridge itself had a weakness Ukraine had been tracking for months, one built by its own earlier strikes. Previous missile attacks against Chonhar had left damage along one section, holes and stress fractures in the deck, that Russian repair crews had patched enough to keep traffic moving, but never fully restored to original strength. Most air defense doctrine assumes the next attack comes from the same direction as the last one, striking the surface again. And that assumption shaped what Russian sensors were tuned to expect that night. Another strike from above, hitting the roadway the way every previous strike had. The Behemoth was not built to hit the roadway. It was flown to that same damaged section for a different reason entirely, guided into the gap left by the earlier strikes and down into the structure itself, past the surface and into the space where the bridge's actual load-bearing supports carried the weight of everything crossing above them. A strike on the surface of a bridge damages what people can see and photograph the next morning. A strike inside its structural support damages the one thing that determines whether the bridge can be trusted to carry weight at all. And that kind of damage does not always announce itself the way a crater does. The warhead detonated inside the support structure, and from outside, in the minutes and hours afterward, the bridge looked almost undisturbed. No dramatic gap in the roadway, no collapsed span visible from a passing car or a satellite pass timed for the wrong moment. To anyone driving toward it that morning, Chonhar looked like a bridge that had survived another night of the war intact. It had not. Whatever the detonation did to the internal structure, the load-bearing supports that had already been carrying stress fractures from earlier strikes, was damage no visual inspection from the surface was ever going to catch quickly. Structural engineers do not certify a bridge safe by looking at it. They certify it by testing what the surface cannot show them: load calculations, stress readings on the supports themselves, sometimes controlled test crossings with vehicles well under the weight of a loaded fuel tanker. And until that testing happened, every truck, every fuel tanker, every piece of ammunition Russia needed to move across Chonhar was crossing a structure nobody could actually vouch for anymore. That uncertainty is exactly the kind of problem a military logistics system is worst equipped to handle quickly. A destroyed bridge has an obvious answer: build a replacement, a pontoon crossing, whatever gets traffic moving again, and everyone up the chain understands the timeline because the damage is visible and undeniable. A bridge that might be compromised internally has no such clean answer. Someone has to authorize an inspection, someone has to decide whether that inspection is thorough enough to trust, and somewhere above all of that, someone has to be willing to put their name on the decision to send fuel tankers, heavy enough to bring down a weakened structure entirely, back across a bridge that engineers can only partially vouch for. Russian command, in the immediate aftermath, believed the raid had failed. Their own record of the night showed exactly one drone detected, exactly one drone destroyed, and a bridge that, as far as anyone could see without tearing up the road deck, was still standing and still open. That record was not dishonest. It was simply incomplete, built entirely from what their sensors could actually detect, and their sensors had only ever been given one drone to find. It took time, the kind of time that matters enormously to a brigade already critically low on fuel, before anyone Russian command trusted was willing to certify that bridge as safe to load with the kind of weight a fuel convoy represents. That hesitation was the entire point. Traffic across Chonhar slowed, then was restricted, then was rerouted onto secondary crossings never built to carry this volume of military logistics, each one adding hours, sometimes days, to a supply run that used to take a fraction of that time. For the 37th Motorized Rifle Brigade, waiting on fuel it had already flagged as urgent in the very communications Ukraine had been reading, those extra hours and days were not an inconvenience. They were the entire war narrowing down to a question of whether trucks that should have arrived that week would arrive at all. None of this looked, from the outside, like a decisive strike. no footage of a bridge collapsing into a river, no headline photograph of a span in the water. And that is exactly why it worked as well as it did. A visibly destroyed bridge invites an immediate, well-resourced repair effort because everyone can see the problem and everyone agrees on the priority. A bridge that looks fine but cannot be trusted invites hesitation, arguments up the chain of command about whether it is safe to load, and precisely the kind of delay that a brigade waiting on critical fuel cannot absorb. The deeper lesson sitting underneath this operation is not really about one bridge or one brigade. It is about what happens when intelligence tells you exactly where your enemy is weakest, and precision lets you exploit that weakness without spending anything close to what the target is worth. A single mid-range drone used as a decoy, one long-range strike drone flown once, and a fuel shortage that had already been quietly bleeding a brigade's readiness for days became, together, more disruptive to that brigade's ability to fight than a much larger and far more expensive strike aimed at the trucks themselves would likely have been. The effects of a strike like this rarely stay contained to the night it happens. First, Russia loses tempo, not equipment. Nothing about this raid destroyed a tank, a gun, or a stockpile of ammunition, and yet a brigade that was already operating on a thin margin lost days it could not get back, at exactly the moment its position on the front depended on staying supplied. Second, it forces Russia into a defensive posture that costs resources even when nothing else gets hit. Every bridge along that corridor now has to be treated as potentially compromised until inspected, which means engineers, inspection time, and repair crews get pulled toward infrastructure instead of toward the front line where Russia would rather have them. Third, and perhaps most corrosive over time, it damages trust inside Russia's own command chain. A commander who authorizes fuel convoys across a bridge that turns out to be structurally unsound is a commander who gets blamed for the consequences. And that kind of risk tends to make officers more cautious, more likely to delay, more likely to demand certainty that this kind of internal damage almost never provides quickly. Every bridge Russia depends on to move fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements across occupied territory now carries a version of the same problem. It is not enough to defend what a bridge can be seen to survive. Somewhere behind that question sits another one nobody can answer just by looking. What does the inside of that structure actually look like now? And how many more strikes like this one is it quietly absorbing before someone finds out the hard way? There is also a broader shift this operation points to, one that goes beyond any single bridge or brigade. For most of this war, strike campaigns against logistics have leaned on sheer volume. Dozens of drones sent at once, overwhelming a target through numbers because any individual drone had a real chance of being intercepted before it arrived. What happened at Chonhar suggests a different model is starting to work alongside that one. Fewer drones, better intelligence, and a target chosen specifically because its failure would cost the enemy far more than the strike itself. 2 drones is not a swarm. It is barely a raid by the standards this war has set. And yet, because cyber intelligence had already identified exactly which unit was vulnerable and exactly which route it depended on, those 2 drones did more damage to Russian readiness in that sector than a much larger, much costlier strike aimed at visible targets likely would have. That is a difficult lesson for any defender to plan around, because it means the threat is no longer just a question of how many interceptors you have or how dense your air defense coverage is. It is a question of how much of your own internal communications the enemy can already read and how far ahead of you they already know what you are about to need. What do you think? Was targeting the bridge instead of the fuel convoy the smarter call? Or did Ukraine just get lucky that Russia was watching the wrong drone? Let us know in the comments below.